Hi, good evening, and thank you for joining us on day 283 at Good Governance GGY. We have a full house today because we have a special guest, Dr. Sanjana Hattutu. We are here to talk about the Online Safety Act because I think the general consensus is that people really don't have a thorough understanding of what it really means to them, for our democracy, for freedom of speech, and all of that. So a change to our usual format, which is more of a roundtable discussion. We are here today to hear from you, Sanjana, if I may call you that. So I'll start with a little preamble and a small introduction, and then we can go straight into your presentation. So today we are here to discuss the Online Safety Act, a law that most people may not realize could deeply affect their daily lives, freedom of expression, and our democracy. While it's meant to tackle online fraud and misinformation, its broad and vague language allows the government to control and censor what we say online. This act could be used to silence anyone who criticizes the government, just like it happened before with journalists who were imprisoned for speaking out. It gives authorities the power to monitor everything we do online, invade our privacy, and decide what we can do and cannot say. Such extensive control threatens to stifle free speech and dissent, making it difficult for people to share their opinions, report injustices, or simply express themselves freely. The international community has already raised concerns about how this law could harm our freedoms and economic growth. So, since we have a subject matter specialist, we'll give a quick introduction to Dr. Sanjana Hattutu, a research director at the Disinformation Project, specializes in the intersection of social media, political communication, propaganda, and disinformation disorders. His doctoral research focused on these issues in Sri Lanka and the presentation of the Christchurch massacre on Twitter. With over 2 decades of experience across multiple continents, he has advice on social media strategy, digital security for journalists, and online advocacy. Founder of Sri Lanka's first civic media website, Ground Views, he now also serves as a special advisor at the ICT for Peace Foundation. Dr. Hattutu regularly consults with leading social media companies to enhance platform integrity, and we are fortunate to have him as our guest today. So, Doctor, did I get all of that right?
Yeah.
We did. Okay, good.
Embarrassingly so. Actually.
Good. No, that's fine. No, we have to give, let people know who you are. So, over to you, Sanjana.
Yeah, thanks for...
What don't we know about this so far?
Well, I don't know what you don't know.
Okay.
But I hope that some of what you may not know may be illuminated by what I have to say.
Right.
And what the audience will also have to glean from the presentation. So thanks for having me here. It's good to be here in person after following some of the broadcasts from when I was in New Zealand and after coming back as well. Hey, listen, I mean, you mentioned online fraud. I don't think the Online Safety Act is dealing with online fraud, though I've heard it being proposed as...
Wasn't that a pretext when they brought it in saying that we're going to protect children?
Well, I'll get to that. In the first instance, they've kind of made every single imaginable excuse to kind of present and pitch this as something that's going to protect the citizens of this country, and particularly women and children. I'm sure they've used online fraud. I've heard all sorts of other really bizarre explanations as to why this is necessary.
Right.
The point of the whole thing is that, well, one of the things that I will go on to say is that we have plenty of laws in this country if you want to deal with online fraud.
Yeah.
Or anything that this law or this act is supposed to be about. You don't need this. And so that introduction itself, I think, problematizes what I'm going to talk about.
Right.
And the real nature of it. I've kind of said, if the audience can see it, and other fiction, because while we are civil about it, and we will hopefully not use expletives in the duration of this live stream, this is actually quite absurd. You can academically analyze it, but the substance of it doesn't make any sense. It's like a real fruit salad.
Okay.
Picked and chosen from various places and for various purposes and brought into an act which makes no sense whatsoever.
Now, supporters of the government usually cite that there's a law like this in Singapore.
Yeah, there's there are laws like this. I mean, this is where my subject matter expertise comes into play. There
Yeah.
are laws like this.
Right.
There are laws and regulations and legal frameworks and various other mechanisms, including voluntary codes, codes of practice, various means through which online harms are tackled, or
Right.
an attempt is made to tackle them in various countries and in various jurisdictions.
Yeah.
There isn't a law like the OSA.
Right. So this is quite a unique.
This is quite a unique one. It's not in the good sense either.
From a global perspective.
From
as
a
well.
global perspective, it doesn't serve the intended and stated about purpose.
Okay.
So if you just go to that slide with Ranil, I think Avanta's cartoon is a really, really good one, as usual.
Yeah.
This was a recent one a couple of days ago on the 18th of May, where I think he was responding to the executive president saying that he was very proud that Sri Lanka had passed 75 laws in the space of 2 years or what have you.
Right.
And the point, and I think, Avanta makes this as well, that with regards to just the OSA, it's not necessarily passing the law, it's what the law does.
Right.
It's what the law is.
Yeah.
So the passage itself, as we know, is now in the Supreme Court, is being challenged,
Right.
the passage of the act, whether it was constitutional or not. But I just want to kind of put the OSA into the perspective of what Avanta is really, really captured really well here around just this tsunami of laws which don't necessarily make much sense.
Right. I mean, with the current composition in Parliament, they
Yeah.
can pass anything, and we know that they pass anything that they want to.
Well-
It's actually the type of laws that are
Yeah.
passed
Yeah.
tells us the intent, tells us
It
what.
gives
Who
you-
are passing it don't even read the law, they just pass
Well,
it.
this was very much the case in with regards to the passage of the bill, where the evening prior, I was at a closed door workshop organized by a leading NGO, and a number of the opposition parliamentarians were there, and they came up to me and said, "Can you please help us construct our float speeches?" Because just the little bit of what I said at that closed door workshop, they hadn't thought about.
Right.
They didn't know.
This was the day before the.
This is the evening
vote.
prior to the parliamentary debate,
Okay.
right? So it's not good, yeah. There are explanations to this that have been proposed to me by friends saying that folks are, there's an existential crisis. You can't keep pace with what's going on, so on and so forth. But I would imagine that opposition parliamentarians would have had a handle on this, which I will go on to demonstrate is actually quite bad in terms of an act, but they didn't. And then the second point is that if you hated yourself enough to listen to the parliamentary debate, in Sinhala you have the word lajjai,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's an equivalent translation in English, and I always say this to my friends outside the country, where you feel ashamed to be Sri Lankan, given the quality of the debate that one was witness to in Parliament. May I just stress that it's not about promoting it and accepting it or debating it and rejecting it. It's just the quality of the debate. It's appalling.
So are you saying the nationalist hasn't improved the quality of debate? In
Well,
Parliament?
clearly not. Clearly not.
Yeah.
And so, we will come to that in terms of what we can talk about after I say my little spiel. But if you can just go to the next slide, I just want to make the point that at its fundamental, problem about the act is that it's an unprecedented threat to FOE.
Yeah.
And I really want to stress this. We have had an awful history in this country for decades. Our lives have been shaped by the fact that the freedom of expression has been curtailed brutally. This act is unprecedented in our statute books in what it does to stifle FOE.
Right.
And so it's unique in that regard, and it's not unique in a good way. It's an unprecedented affront to the freedom of expression.
Right.
It impacts also everybody. Now, I say this because, and you might have heard this as well, a lot of the commentary that you get from people that you go and talk with around one's opposition to the proposed Anti-Terrorism Act or the PTA or specific pieces of legislation we know aren't good for human rights, but when you go and talk to them and say, "Ne, අපි ත්‍රස්තවාදීව නෙමෙයිනේ. අපිට බලපාන්නේ නැහැ මේක. We are not terrorists. It doesn't apply to us. We are not doing anything illegal. We are not doing anything unlawful." And so there is that distance that folks have with very problematic pieces of legislation. Also because of the structural racism in this country, all Tamils are terrorists by default unless proven otherwise. Anybody else who's not a Tamil or a Muslim doesn't have anything much to fear, right?
I think that's a fair
say it as
comment
it is.
to make. Yeah, absolutely.
And so the point about this, though, is that it doesn't really care who you are. And, I will almost guarantee, I'm not a soothsayer, I'm not an astrologer, but I will almost guarantee that the oppression that will be the consequence of this act's enactment will be oppressive more towards the south by southern political parties who are, will use the act, and politicians and men and women and individuals and institutions with power, so that they are not held accountable. And the OSA allows for that. Okay. So it is going to impact everybody, no matter who you vote for, no matter which political party you believe in. And that, I would submit, is not a flaw, it's a feature. That's what the act does.
That's the purpose.
That's the purpose of that. It's not about women and children.
Right.
It's not about protecting anybody. It's about protecting those in power and those who want power and those in authority. It's about making them unaccountable. It's frightening. It's chilling.
It's about the protection for themselves. Really.
It's about an architecture that they can now use, which is the substance of the act alone. Leave aside all the other legislation that is going to be proposed and everything else that is already in the statute books and the misappropriation of the ICCPR. So all of that we can talk about. So this is not in isolation. Yeah. That context is important, but just the OSA itself is what I put up there, is a party-blind threat to democracy.
Right.
If you are interested in democracy, this has to go, right? The other point that I want to make, which I think surprises many, is that generally when we talk about a law, the response that you get is that, particularly with the OSA, we have to be careful about what we post henceforth.
Right.
And that has been the general kind of worry. Yeah. Right? You have to be careful. People are scared about and anxious about what will happen to content, including this broadcast, by the way.
Right, yeah.
Right, including the comment that you'll get, for which you will be held liable for, what I say, for which I'll be held liable for. And so that's a forward projection as a consequence of the law being passed. The issue is, the law doesn't make a distinction between what is in the future and whatever that you've done in the past. The OSA can be applied against you from the first time you ever used the internet.
Retrospectively.
From the first time you ever touched a keyboard. Which, at least for me, was in the early 90s through dial-up modem and email.
Yeah.
And Netscape and the Web 1.0.
Yeah.
So if it is brought against a certain individual or an institution for whatever reason or purpose, the act allows you to go through that individual's history of online commentary and content and production and whatever that person has done back until the very first day, potentially.
Yeah. So nothing is off limits.
Nothing is off limits.
Anything that you engaged in online.
Anything. And this, of course, matters.
Right.
For the umbrella of this conversation,
right.
I will come to that later.
What about close communications, like one-to-one?
Well, again, I will come to that as well, but it does apply to that as well, and that's the problem, right? So what you call close communication, privileged communication, and what we call technically end-to-end encrypted communication, everything's gay. Yeah, right. Nothing's off the table, and there's no time limit. Retroactively or retrospectively can go back, and then, of course, for whatever that is henceforth going to be under the scrutiny of the act as well. So that's really quite chilling and quite unprecedented. And this next slide goes to what you said. It's everything, right?
Right.
Anything that has an IP address. Now, an IP address might not be understood by the audience. Think of like an address like 5/2 Spathodia or 40/3 Hill Street, right? Or Temple Trees. All our buildings have physical addresses. at great violence to the complexity of the internet, any device that's connected to the internet also has an address, whether it's on a local network or on the internet. Any address on the internet falls under the OSA. That means any computer, any device, anything that's connected to the internet falls under the purview of the Act.
Right.
And so there's no escaping it if you use anything to connect to the internet.
Right.
That's also unprecedented, right? It's quite chilling.
So devices, everything.
And no, the whole spectrum, right? The whole spectrum. And I go back to a time, if example, the next slide, many people have forgotten, many people may not even know of this name, Tissanagan. Some of us may remember very fondly, actually, and very sadly that he's not in this country anymore. Thankfully, he's still alive. Tissa's case was a celebrated case. In 2009, he was taken in, and he was taken in because the Attorney General said it was inconvenient that he had published an editorial and then an article years prior to when he was taken in, saying that Bahrain was being bombed and that the Sri Lankan army was responsible for basically the suffering of the Tamils at the time. This was coming towards the end of the war. There was, what we say is, where's the lie? There was no lie in that. Right. But of course, it was inconvenient. He was incarcerated. A confession was forced. And the only two things that the Attorney General, apart from the confession, were the case presented for the case, was the editorial and that article. If you go to the next slide, on 31st of August 2009, he was given 20 years of RI. And it's really interesting to go into why, for arousing communal feelings. So this is a matter of legal and public record. So it's not an interpretation. This is not my opinion. The audience should know that this is a copy paste from the judgment, right? So it's not an interpretive slide. It is a indicative slide of the judgment. Now, I have to be careful not to swear, but I'm not sure what arousing communal feelings means in the context of imprisoning a man, a journalist, for 20 years.
For 20 years.
20
right?
years.
But no, it doesn't matter the length for imprisoning a journalist.
Do we have a statute in our books?
Well, this was under
this.
it was there. It was there.
Okay.
The problem is, if we go to the next slide, this was in 2009. And this is what all of us in this country now fall under. Any person, whether in or outside of Sri Lanka, who poses a threat to national security, public health or public order, or promotes feelings of ill will and hostility between different classes of people by communicating a false statement. And it goes on to say, you risk being imprisoned or subject to a fine. So the point I make is that the OSA makes us tissers, all of us, and you in particular, because this broadcast, anything that you put up,
that's great,
right, can be interpreted in any way to suggest that the public health, whatever that means, the public order, whatever that means, promote or has promoted feelings of ill will, whatever that means, and hostility between different classes of people, whatever that means. I checked with the Sinhala because the Sinhala takes precedent.
Yeah.
Panthi, the confusion is
Classes
this is not language you find in any country, in any draft or past regulatory framework or law
where you're talking
around
about
online harm.
classes of people.
It's
Could be interpreted anyway.
Well, it's very broad.
It's open.
Well, it's open.
Does there have to be an aggrieved party? Like, does somebody watching this can say, look, he said something.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Aroused my.
100%.
Right.
100%. And it has been already been. The application of it has also been now problematic insofar as the first cases.
Right. I
have
think
gone.
we saw with Natasha's case, right? Like it was a.
No,
100%.
And the poets, and everybody who's been incarcerated, even in the recent years, this expands the threat for the clampdown in that manner, now with the weaponization of what is now in our statute books. So it's bad enough that it was done under 17 years of the ICCPR,
Yeah. Now
which wasn't architected for it.
Yeah.
But is a bastardization and a really twisted interpretation of the law.
Yeah.
Now you have a custom built
for that purpose.
for the
just
purpose
for that particular
of
purpose.
expanding
Yeah.
and exacerbating what was done under the ICCPR.
Right. ICCPR, they used it for the opposite.
Correct.
I mean,
But now you have something that is
Whole-
custom built for it, right?
Right.
So, I mean, the next slide is that we are all Tissa,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And if that, back in the day, which was the case,
Yeah.
with Trastavadik, in the South, nobody really cared. If you were a Tamil journalist writing what you did at the time, in 2009, you were a terrorist, right? But now, in a wonderful boomerang of karma,
Yeah,
we
it's
are all
it's
Tissas.
gonna come back on
It's
us.
come back on us. And so what Tissa had to face legally, we now have to face. So the point I wanted to make, and I think was brought up as well, is that it weaponizes interpretation, right?
It's very subjective.
It's very versatile. So it can be parochial, partisan,
Right.
expedient. The magistrate can be forced to make a particular interpretive, take a particular interpretive, take on a particular case. And if you just go to the next slide, along with the weaponization, you have these words which are meaningless. Right. In addition to, I think that should go up as well. Sorry, it's up there. It's feelings, right? I made the point, half jokingly in some of the presentations and workshops that I made. It's like feelings is good for love letters. Feelings you
Not
talk
for
about
law.
adara katha,
Yeah.
adaravante again,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You would never find it's really, I'm struggling to find the words to understand the incorporation of these words into a law, because you can't adjudicate on it, right? All of these are subject to broad interpretations. Anybody can say maliciously, wantonly, what is false or not, which is a problem I'll come to later on.
Is there a problem with the translation from Sinhala to English?
No.
It's
No,
the
it's
same
actually,
intent.
it's worse in Sinhala.
Worse in Sinhala.
So I mean, as you can imagine,
Right.
But it's actually there's no material difference
Right.
between the Sinhala and the English. The point is just that it's overbroad. It's meaningless.
Right.
But the meaningless is the point. And that's also what I want to stress.
So keep it vague enough that
Keep it vague so that it can be stretched.
Right.
To go after somebody or something or an institution. And so there's this thing called the Truth Commission,
Yeah.
which of course from South Africa was a great thing,
Yeah.
right? It was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which
Right,
actually wanted to get to truth and reconciliation.
People asked for something like that after the war.
Yeah, but I mean, but
Yeah,
here
process
we
of
have
reconciliation.
a situation where there is, and I don't want to go into too much of detail because it's not been constituted yet. Mr. Alas has said apparently that it will be constituted soon. We don't know. However, there is this Truth Commission in the Act, which, if you read the Act, literally can be the arbiters of truth.
Right.
And it gets worse. You have no recourse for appeal. Exactly.
It's like George Orwell.
So
Yeah, it's very
it's
Orwellian.
worse actually.
Very, very
Orwellian
Orwellian. Yeah.
fiction
It's Animal Farm.
is realized and then also expanded on.
Yeah.
So it's worse than Orwell,
Well, it's Big Brother.
right?
More than- yeah.
And so again, you struggle to comprehend the obscenity of this. And it's not constituted yet, but it is in the Act. And once it is constituted, by the way, this Truth Commission can also appoint experts. And the experts,
Who appoints the Truth Commission?
The Truth Commission is appointed by the Constitutional Council, but the Constitutional Council, we have learned about 2 or 3 months ago, according to the current executive, should follow the executive's fiat.
Right.
So there are all sorts of problems
Yeah.
in the context of applying.
Actually, that was
application.
that point was expressly made. He
No.
said
So
that-
we can't talk about this in the vacuum, right? I
Right.
mean, the law is part of and given birth to by and is going to be interpreted in a particular political context.
Right.
So when you have the current executive saying that the CC is under him and is an arm or extension of the executive and the incumbent executive, and if the Truth Commission is going to be appointed by the CC, it's not Einsteinian logic to see where this is going.
Yeah.
And then that just to be very clear, that creates a precedent.
Right.
So my point always is that it's not just the incumbent executive, it's all executives, given this cursed office that we have in the future, who will be able to use it in this
Do
way.
we know when?
We don't know when.
We don't know.
We don't know when.
No, in the
officially we
sense
don't know
when this was actually birthed. Like when did this whole
What,
come about?
The OSA?
The OSA, yeah. This
What
is
do you mean?
post Aragalaya, right? Like,
Oh,
this is
100%.
post Aragalaya.
100%. I mean, I could come to that, but should we wait to that?
We'll wait for it. We'll wait for it. I
It's a
don't
long.
want to
it's a-
I don't want to preempt you.
It's
but
not
yeah,
a quick birth. It's a bit
Right.
of an elephantine gestation that got worse over time.
Right.
So the first birth was actually in just prior to the COVID-19
Right.
pandemic.
Yeah.
They wanted to bring it about then, but the pandemic had other plans.
Spread of misinformation and all.
And then you couldn't, and so it's gone through several changes, but
Right.
it's not a new thing. It's going to be a steamroller on minorities who are. The conversations I've had are actually very different from the south to the north. Tamils realize it. Muslims in the east realize it. They know. You never get it in the initial conversations I had about the OSA. The South is worried about it. What immediately after its passage I got from the Tamils in the North was that the only space we had for memorialization, the only space we had for critical dissent, the only space we had for accountability,
was online.
the only space we had for critical discussions. You had your Aragalaya. We've had Aragalaya for many years prior.
Right.
And the only space that we had is now robbed of us. They get it.
Right.
And they were, if I may say so, shitting bricks.
Yeah.
Because they know.
Yeah. They can see what's coming down the pike.
They know. They know because it's not just about what's coming. It's about what they live through today. Right. That's exacerbated as a consequence of the act. Right. So we have the luxury of saying what's coming.
Yeah.
They don't have the luxury.
They don't have.
They negotiate every day. Right. So it is going to be a death blow for investigative journalism. If I may name the premier investigative journalist, somebody like Namini Vijaydas, I mean, I don't know how she's going to operate under the OSA to hold accountable those she holds accountable in the newspaper, in the Sunday Times, because those kinds of columns are going to be very, very problematic under the OSA. Yeah. People who bear witness to and seek to investigate and seek to put the sunlight of scrutiny and hold people accountable, they are the ones who are going to be attacked.
Yes.
As opposed to the ones who should actually be held accountable. So it's going to criminalize bearing witness to repression, which is really, really bad.
Right.
And I think that, cutting a long story short, it's,
Dissent.
It's not just dissent. They want to stop another Aragalaya.
Right.
It's very simple. It's not really it's technological. At the end of the day, if you take a look at what gave rise to the Aragalaya, not maybe as a geospatial thing, but a debate in our minds, in our collective consciousness, in our society that year and since, online, digitally, but that year geospatially, it was stories, right? It was stories we told ourselves. It was people, all of you coming onto the streets. You didn't know each other, right? In all of these stories, because we had the time, because we didn't have electricity, we didn't have fuel, and there was a new communal bond that was created, and people started sharing stories. The neighborhood pots and pans noise became a Sri Lankan pots and pans. Kaptu Kak Kak became the song of the train horn. The train horn became then the conversation that was on YouTube. So there was this merging and morphing and marriage of stories in an unbelievable way. The OSA stops that.
Right. So basically, the Aragalaya threatened the power structure.
This
is a reaction of the incumbent system.
Just to be very clear, what I mean by the Aragalaya is a collection of narratives.
Right.
That critiqued power.
Yeah.
Lots of people, because we have to be clear. No?
Sure,
I mean,
sure, no,
you might have a different
because-
version of that. That is one take. That is what I would like to kind of bring to this discussion. It was a collective of stories. In its collective, the collective was the power that held power accountable.
Yeah, I think GGG was a physical manifestation of the Aragalaya.
And there were other locations like in Kandy, in Wall, and
but like you said, the stories is what awakened the people.
That's right.
Right.
That's
So
right.
and really, I think the existing power structure saw this as a threat because the
Yeah.
people built another power center.
Yeah, so
right.
it's-
And it really drove change, right? We
That's
saw
right.
what it
And
did.
it goes back to Chimamanda Achebe's the part of the single narrative, right?
Right.
In her 2009 TED talk, she talked about the power of the single narrative.
Yeah.
And the single narrative, if one will, was the victor's narrative, was the dominant power narrative, was the SLPP narrative, was the Rajapaksa narrative, was the Sinhala Buddhist narrative, was the majoritarian narrative. Those things kind of really buckled.
Right.
So we can, again, I don't want to get
People got
distracted by the narrative
little bit more-
structure of the Aragale, which is actually a really interesting thing to talk about.
Right.
But essentially, the OSA is a hard stop.
Right.
It's not even graceful. It's a hard stop,
on that.
right? And that's what it tries to prevent.
Right.
It's going to enhance surveillance in a big way in what is already a surveillance state. I don't think you folks realize it.
Yeah.
We are heavily surveilled.
There was a story yesterday about Tirana Alas having a press conference and announcing that they're going to collect information on everybody, and it was announced in a press conference.
Well, Mr. Alas has a really
There's no
bizarre
reason.
idea of two individuals selected from various places around the
district
country
around,
that are loyal to not a party but to him, who will report on matters that are germane to him.
Yeah.
And you don't really know who these two individuals are, but the police are being told who they
To
are.
cooperate with them.
I mean,
Yeah.
the brown shirts come to mind in fascist Hitler,
Yeah.
Hitler's time. All sorts of other things come to mind with regards to the structure that he's proposing. But that is not the only surveillance. It's also digital surveillance, right? Movement tracking. Because there's now a burden of, and I don't want to get into the legal stuff, but there's a burden now on what's called intermediaries, which is the ISPs, the internet service providers, and the social media companies, if they are requested to do so, to present our online transactions, our online communications. Now, the industry as a whole has said we are not going to comply. The Asia Internet Forum has said we are not going to play ball. But that's not going to stop the local authorities.
Right.
The CID, TID,
But
National
can they
Intelligence.
compel, like a Facebook
In the current
or a-
law, they can ask, and the companies need to present that, give it up. But the Asian Internet Coalition has basically said, we will not comply, we will leave you.
Right.
And I'll come to that later on as well. They will basically, it's unprecedented. I mean, it's good that you brought it up. Now that you brought it up, the Asian Internet Coalition has issued 4 statements. They're all in the public domain.
Yeah.
Again, Lajjai, right? We talk about bloody AI and all, the 21st, 22nd century Sri Lanka. We have the entirety of the industry in the world telling us on 4 separate occasions that this law is not one that they can comply with.
Yeah.
And the 4th time was when Mr. Alas was asked in Parliament by Harini on, I think, the 2nd day of the debate, whether the industry had accepted what was in the bill. And Mr. Alas said yes.
So he lied.
So he lied.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they all came out.
No. I think we have normalized lying.
No, what I'm saying is the next day itself.
No, and that's why.
They denied it.
No. By the evening, because it was that
By the
serious.
same day, yeah.
No. I think we normalized lying. It's
Yeah.
a shit thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's also, if you claim you're a Buddhist, it's also not the Buddhist thing to do.
Right.
But to do it in Parliament and have it recorded in the Hansard and to say such a blatant lie and to make the entire industry issue a statement is just a shame on all of us as a country.
And also such an easily provable lie.
Well, I don't
You know
want
what I
to
mean?
like,
It's not like-
I don't know whether it's ignorance or
Yeah.
just arrogance. I think
Right.
it's probably both.
Both.
But just want to kind of come back to this point where the surveillance on all of us is just going to potentially exponentially increase. It's going to be proactive in the sense of we don't know when we'll be surveilled, so they can say Anna Chaminda Gigi Vayeking Araka Hemakiwa. So they might actually say, because you've said something to increase the surveillance on you, you won't know, and that extends to family, friends, etc. And so it could be anybody, anywhere, and on demand.
I mean,
And
this
obviously
is,
it impacts asymmetrically more Tamils and Muslims and minorities, including the gay, lesbian, and transgender communities.
right. I mean, we were always worried about backsliding democracy, but we are backsliding into fascism.
Well, it's not backslide. We are accelerating, faster than a Formula One car.
Yeah.
This is not it's really worrying.
Worrying, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I am just, I can talk
Especially
about
people
it,
like us who are in the space, we put ourselves out there.
When I wrote my first article in September, I wasn't even in the country, and when the bill came out, I was like, what, guys, this
What's
is
going
bad.
on? Yeah.
Right, and it astounds me that folks really don't understand what is now in our statute books. Anyway, so just moving on, it also just, for folks like you, for folks in the private sector, in industry, who often believe that they're immune from the rest of what Sri Lankans have to face, it's a massive compliance. No, sorry. We can talk about data collection. It's kind of linked to. We can just.
You won't talk about this.
I won't talk about compliance. The data collection part is that it's linked to surveillance, and the PDPA is the Personal Data Privacy Protection Act, which is actually a gold standard.
Right.
It's, supported by the European Union, and now you have the OSA in direct opposition to the PDPA, which is also unprecedented, right? So we'll have to figure this out through the courts.
How does it impact visitors to Sri Lanka?
No,
are they subject to that law too?
Yeah.
But they are protected by GDPR.
No, exactly. So there's no sense in any of this.
Right.
Because the OSA applies to everybody on planet Earth.
Oh, really? Okay. Not just Sri Lanka.
No, that's how. No, I'm not joking. That's how it's
It said that at the beginning, right?
It said that at the beginning.
It said that at the beginning.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So, no.
If they're talking about Sri Lanka.
No.
It doesn't have to.
No. The OSA is a planetary.
Yeah,
a planetary scale law.
I knew we have an ambitious government, but
making
laws for the whole world.
This is
sounds quite extraordinary.
As Shakespeare said, a vaulting
Right.
ambition that overreaches itself.
Yeah,
Right.
Maybe he should be the Secretary General.
Anyway, to come to this, industry is going to face a lot of problems because it's going to be a nightmare for compliance. It's going to be a nightmare for lawyers. I just give you an anecdotal thing. I have a LinkedIn account, and folks can follow you on LinkedIn, and the most amount of followers since January. I think about 150 are lawyers, right? And I find that really interesting because the legal profession is also trying to wade its way through the implications of this. Compliance is a nightmare for marketing, for the advertising industry, for insurers, for the Ceylon Chambers of Commerce, for SMEs.
Great for the legal profession.
Anybody who's, 100%, but also, on the other hand, they're also quite worried, because a litigious environment where you might end up like the United States, actually, where everybody litigates against everybody else, is also not healthy for business, right? So it's not a pro-business law. Right. It's not a pro-business act in any shape, way, or form. So anyway, if you go forward, I think it's what this concept called the panopticon.
I had to look that up, by the way.
where essentially goes from there's a particular way in which, for example, prisons were constructed, where the cells were it was a circular shape, where the guard tower was in the middle, and all of the cells were open to the guard tower. Now, the point of that is that you don't know when the guard tower is looking at you, and consequently, you are in fear of the guard looking at you and looking at what you're doing all the time. Right. That's what's a panopticon, put simply. So all of us are now going to be anxious about.
It's encouraging self-censorship.
So that's what chilling effects is about.
Right.
It's a accelerant for self-censorship, which is why we go back to the Tamil story, because they get it.
Shut up and sit down.
Right, and it's all. By the way, I go back to my earlier point. It's not just about self-censorship. Yeah. It's about the anxiety about what you have posted already. Yeah. So think about every comment you made during Daragale. Yeah. Think about every video, every post, every email, every WhatsApp, every video, every meme, every image, everything that you said on WhatsApp, everything that you said on Facebook.
We were very brave during that time.
Every tweet, every YouTube video, every LinkedIn post, everything and anything that is digital in form, anywhere you put it, is now subject to the OSA.
Right.
Right. So it's not just about the chilling effects henceforth. It's perpetual invasive and intensive. And this is just a slide I'm going to keep up, and hopefully the tech crew will keep up for a while. But also, I mean, folks who are listening to the live stream, once it's a video, can pause it here. I just tried to kind of capture every aspect of life that is going to be impacted by the OSA.
So you keep this for a little while.
And and by the way, I mean, if it's a video, you can pause it. So
Sure.
I think it will shock folks.
Art and literature too.
And no, 100%, right? Why did Avanta go to the Supreme Court? Right? Why did cartoonists go to the Supreme Court to challenge the bill? Because they knew what was coming, right?
Right.
Theatre folks who do theatre, folks who do performative art, folks who do digital art,
Comedy.
anything that
Parody,
is anything,
whatever.
Covers
anything.
every part of
Anything.
life.
No,
This is life.
no.
This is-
Yeah, quite right, actually. Right? It's all encompassing. Everything.
And teaching.
No, it's everything. No, this is just a snapshot, right? And so I think it's just, if you just reflect on it calmly, there's no escaping it. And which is why I say that this is an unprecedented law,
Yeah.
right? It's invasive to everything that you are and to everything that you do. We talked about this off camera when I was, if you go to the next slide, preparing for this. And something I told you was that one way to understand it is in context. We are dealing with a government that is accelerating repressive laws. This they passed.
Yeah.
But you have to see the OSA as part of what is going to come as well. And that's worrying. The OSA in and of itself is a disaster.
Yeah.
What is being proposed as laws and legislative frameworks and regulatory frameworks compounds that disaster.
Right. I think to underscore that, I think the labor laws, the labor reforms they're proposing is opposed by pretty much all major international sort of human rights
HRW,
organizations.
Amnesty International.
Amnesty, all are saying this law is going to be a disaster.
Well, I mean, that's a familiar story with everything that they're trying to propose, right? With all of the drafts that they've put up.
Right.
And if you just go to the next slide, actually, there's a bit of background that's necessary for this. That's actually regional. A lot of people may not know, or may have heard, I don't know, that Meta is threatening to leave India because it's its largest market for WhatsApp.
Yeah.
There's a 2021 law in India that requires or compels companies like Meta to hand over the encryption keys to the Indian government. This matter is now being adjudicated by the Delhi High Court. The July is apparently when the decision is going to come out. Meta is very clear, as it was clear to the British government when they tried the same thing, as it is being clear to the Europeans now and the EU, which is trying the same thing. We will not do this, right? We will leave your market. There's no two way about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
we will not hand
privacy
over.
concern for
It's a
them.
privacy, right? It will fundamentally break end-to-end encryption.
Right.
It will fundamentally break. You can't just have it for one country. It's a Jenga that completely breaks down. You can't remove one block from that. It doesn't work that way.
I mean, if there's probable cause, I mean, you could probably compel them to open up a single phone if there's suspicious activity.
They will not do that.
They
And
won't
that's
do that
also
either.
not the nature of E2EE. I mean, there are cases in the United States where the FBI has all these Israeli technology to get into the phones because the companies like Apple, which provide OS operating system level security, and companies like Meta simply don't give it up.
Yeah.
Right? Unless there's a very high threshold.
Right.
Right? It's not default. They don't hand over the encryption keys even to the American government. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Now, the point that I want to make is that Meta, I want to underscore this, again, Meta is threatening to leave India because the Indian government is going to compel Meta to hand over the encryption keys.
Yeah.
What people may not realize is that Article or Clause 65 of the proposed Anti-Terrorism Act.
That's the same thing? Okay. So if they're holding their ground in India, they're certainly not going to worry about holding their ground here.
I'm proud to be a Sri Lankan. I always have been. I also know that we have a population less than the population of Mumbai.
Yeah.
Now, if Meta is going to leave India, a country of 1.5 billion and their largest WhatsApp market, am not too confident that they're not going to leave Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
as much as I love this country,
Yeah.
if we compel them to do the same. So, I mean, so what I'm trying to kind of suggest here is that the OSA is part of a greater scaffolding of oppressive legislation that this government, in its unbridled adventurism, is trying to bring about without any cognition of the way the world works,
Right.
at least in this domain.
Yeah.
Right? If you go to the next one, this is also the story with the cybersecurity and telecoms. So others have published in the Daily Mirror and I think the Financial Times and other places as well. What's really bizarre is that it's all coming under the MOD. I have
Right.
publicly articulated my concern. The drafts are being looked at by the MOD. It's going to be controlled by the MOD. The drafts themselves are really bad, right? There are other experts. So it's really it's a MOD-led redrafting of conversations in this country.
Right.
Because the OSA is also linked to the public security ministry, and then by extension, the military of this and the militarization of this country. So you're looking at a whole constellation of laws that basically shut us up.
Stifling.
Shut up laws, no? We were calling them?
Yeah, you could call them shut up laws. Actually,
Yeah.
worse than shut up laws. These are incarcerated laws. These are, these are laws that will. You can ask me that these are laws that can come into your business and completely wreck it. If that expert or if a magisterial inquiry recommends that the material on your computers in your office are subject to the OSA, mate, you're screwed because you have to give it up, which means that all of your confidential documents, all of your trade secrets, all of your negotiations, all of your deals, all of your intra-corporate communications, all of your cloud files, all of your local files, everything is gone. Right? It's not just gone, it could be gone, but it's also subject to review. So
Right.
that expert or that individual or that process is obviously, once they have the computer, they're not going to limit them. You will have to trust them to limit themselves to what is, what the case is. But once that data is gone, that data is gone.
gone.
So it's a death blow
Right.
for industry.
Wouldn't it be great if you could turn the tables on the deals that the government does on behalf of us?
Well, I would still, that as tempting as that is, I would still not rejoice in the possibility of using the OSA for that.
Right.
Because that is the problem.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
There are other laws,
Yeah.
and then there are also democratic processes, Parliament, for example.
Yeah.
The primacy of Parliament and all sorts of committees, including the COPE and COPA. There are democratic processes. You don't need the OSA. You shouldn't celebrate the OSA. You shouldn't even think about the OSA
Right.
as a means to do that.
No, I'm just saying we need to turn the tables on this.
We need to turn the tables on this, but not using
Not-
the
not in
OSA,
that- in that-
right?
in that-
And so if you go to the next slide, I will just come to the end. I mean, it's unfixable. I think it's like it's as fixable as that ship that sank after
Right.
catching fire.
The Express Pearl.
The Express Pearl.
Right.
It's the absurdity of amendments to fix this,
Yeah.
which Mr. Ullis, I think, is also going to propose, is farcical. You cannot fix it.
Right.
It's like trying to make the Express Pearl seaworthy again. My submission is a very clear one. It's a very simple one. Everybody, apart from, I suppose, the people who brought this up, need to commit to rejecting it and repealing it.
Right.
It cannot be in our statute books.
So, is there a need to do an online safety law in good faith? I mean, is there a need for that?
100%. There's a conversation there which we can have after I finish these last two slides.
Right.
Around the need for it, because the social media companies aren't doing a very good job of it. In fact, they're really doing a terrible job at it. Just today, 5 school boards from Canada have taken Meta to court for the harms to youth and teenagers as a consequence of the content on just Meta's product and platform surfaces. Innumerable research, academic research, and innumerable anecdotal stories, innumerable media coverage from all parts of the world around the degree to which online platforms exacerbate, seed, spread, and target harms, right? So
Right.
there is a real problem here, which is what we can talk about some of the models that we could have looked at.
Yeah.
So there is a conversation about doing something about it. The OSA is not that
not
conversation.
Yeah. Because the
OSA
intent is
not-
very different.
No, the OSA is presented as that, but it's not that, right?
Yeah.
So, so it's unfixable. So very quickly, Ambika Satkunanathan has done a great service by publishing an article in March around what I try to get, which is that, some folks tell me if we incorporate all the amendments that the Supreme Court, suggested, could that make it work?
Right.
I don't think so, but I am not a lawyer. So it's really helpful to have Ms. Satkunanathan say the same thing, that even if you incorporate everything that the Supreme Court said needed to be done, it's still unfixable. It's still unworkable. Right? So it has to be just gotten rid of.
Okay. I mean, I suppose the Supreme Court feels like they have to throw it back down and say, okay, fix this and bring it back to us.
Well,
could you keep it tied up in this perpetual cycle of?
Well, I have two responses. I don't think the Supreme Court also knows what they're talking about. Right? I think that, you see, online harm regulation is a specific subject domain expertise.
Right.
It's not telecoms regulation. It's not media law. It's not broadcasting law. It's a very specific subject domain expertise.
Yeah.
In Sri Lanka, post Aragalaya, you are an expert in epidemiology today, you're an expert in macroeconomics tomorrow, you're an expert in dentistry the day after. And so expertise is a very loose term.
Right.
Particularly post Aragalaya, because, on social media, there's this promotion of oneself and one's opinions as expertise, which is bollocks, right? So I'm not sure that Sri Lanka has the expertise within the country to talk about what's necessary with regards to online harm reduction and regulation. Consequently, I don't think the legal fraternity also has the necessary awareness around contemporary jurisprudence and laws in other countries and other contexts that can be leaned upon to draft something that's fit for purpose here.
Right. So we heard when this was brought out that the UK are trying to pass something similar, right? And there's a lot of opposition to that.
Yeah.
And so people cite that and say, look, if the UK can do it, why can't we do it here?
Yeah.
There's one in Singapore.
Yeah.
Do you know what the difference is between the one in Singapore and the one here?
Well, the one in Singapore is called POFMA. The one in the UK is called the OSA, the Online Safety Act as well. There are huge problems with both. We don't have the time to go into it. Singapore, being Singapore, can have that law and then can work around it because it's, Singapore being Singapore.
Right.
Right. And there are problems of human rights
Sure.
in Singapore that nobody
Absolutely.
really wants to talk about. And POFMA is hugely problematic. If you just search for POFMA and all of the international organizations like HRW and Amnesty International and experts in freedom of expression have all articulated concerns about POFMA. But POFMA works for better or for worse in Singapore. You can't export that and import that into other contexts.
Well, our argument has been, you give us the standard of living that they have in
100%.
Singapore, we'll trade off some freedoms.
Yeah. I mean, I may not agree with that, but anyway.
In jest, we kind of sort of put it out there.
But the OSA in the UK is also interesting. If you are talking about women and children, there's actually, folks who want to study it can go and study the OSA in the UK, where there's actually, there's meat in that to protect women and children.
Right.
There's actually, here, where is that in the Act? It's nowhere in the Act. It's a smidgen. It's a passing hint of an afterthought, of some imaginative thing that they are now clinging on to present this as something that it isn't. Right. So if you're talking about being inspired by the OSA in the United Kingdom, then by all means use the substance in that to bring it here and apply it. Right? There's laws in New York State that have been inspired from California. There's the DSA in Europe. There's the Scottish hate speech law. There is stuff by the e-safety regulation, the regulatory body and the e-safety commissioner in Australia. There is the code of practice from New Zealand. There's all sorts of ways in which you can address this Gordian knot of online harms. The OSA is not one of them.
Right. So, that's basically the slides that Sanjay had for us. You all had some questions, right? Specifically. Angeline, you had a question?
Well, it was,
Yeah, you need to get the mic.
And Dushio said something.
Yeah.
So I was privy to your research on how the social media, like the art, the memes, the songs, the comics, and of course the people who went online, like Retta and who kept how it fueled and how it impacted this Aragale and how it brought it together, and it was a beautifully presented piece of research, I think. We see it very little. I mean, we see the comics still, I think, in the newspaper, and we pass them around in our groups. But a lot of these people that we relied on have gone completely silent. We've seen also, the absence of, a lot of what we saw then, because, we ourselves are censoring ourselves, right? We don't,
Yeah, of
we
course.
say we don't name call. I mean, come on, we all, said, go bear and pisek and all of that, but we don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
How do you see this? How do you, what is your research on what has happened right now?
Yeah.
This self-censorship and, this whole sort of, it's a deafening silence, I think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these people we relied on, who we held up, and, we, as soon as some of them went live, we went live and said, okay, we actually went to the police station when Ratta was,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
arrested.
Yeah, there was, and the lawyers turned up.
Yeah,
There
the
was a lot of
lawyers
that,
turned
right?
up. I mean, even if you look at May 9th, we all went,
Yeah.
the lawyers were actually, having a human barricade. We don't see that anymore. So how do you see, this change of the space, the deafening silence?
Well, I can bear witness to the online version of what you have articulated is, I suppose, also a physical manifestation of a shrinking space. You don't have those collectives, you don't have those gatherings, you don't have that kind of communication, you don't have that kind of conversation. Actually, Gota Gobaya, I think, is now the least of our worries. It's the current incumbent, I think, who has thinner skin.
but there's no name.
The tragedy of all of this, and I must say this very clearly, is that the fear that some of us had, and certainly I had, around all of what Mr. Rajapaksa, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa would bring about, symbolized, was partial to, biased towards, and certainly connected to the military in order to bring about.
Yeah.
The irony is that there's a great acceleration around all of that under the current incumbent.
It's worse.
It's worse. It's worse in any number of ways, including at the pace of which all of this is unraveling. So that's a really interesting irony, because I think that Gota Gobaya would fly, but anything against the current incumbent may actually raise greater ire.
But also he was for the Aragale until he wasn't.
Well, that's also
And now he's expressly said he will never allow another Aragale. He said that.
So you match or latch on to, or match with or latch on to that explicitly, publicly, expressly stated goal or intent, what the OSA allows.
Right.
And then you see how you are now public enemy number one for continuing a critical conversation that is in the spirit of the Aragalaya, in a context and now under a law that completely is inimical to it.
Yeah.
So it has transformed what was emancipatory and democratic into something that should be
It's illegal.
is rendered illegal. Not illegal.
Practically.
Never accepted,
Yeah.
never embraced,
Yeah.
is rendered illegal.
But
And-
fearful. Because
You have to be, people are fearful, people are anxious
But
about that as well.
to a certain extent, what we continue to do at Thimiregasyaya is purely a token of, it's purely tokenism, right, at this stage.
Well, I don't, that's what you say, that's often-
the fact that we have created and maintained a civic space for this long, 283 days now, where others have not been allowed to do that. Like, we don't get tear gas and water cannons. So to a certain extent, there is a certain amount of privilege that sort of we enjoy, that we are allowed to sort of continue. They did try
we are
to,
censoring ourselves often, right? I mean,
we do.
We say let's be silent, and
Right.
we don't do a lot of the things that we did say, for instance, at GGG.
Yeah.
all those songs and
Yeah.
all this chanting that we did.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's also,
I
I
mean-
mean, just there's also, I think, a shift in context, right? I mean, folks are now tired. There's an existential crisis. The rosy headlines around what the country is presented as doesn't match with, I think, what all of
But
us know.
also, Angeline,
So I
the
think
nature
people
of
are
our
tired.
protest probably is the reason that we've been able to continue
Exactly.
for this long.
Yes.
Now, if we continued sort of, doing, if we continue to try to do that,
Well, if I may,
They-
there is
they would have
actually
shut us down
a
a little
dimension
faster.
to this that actually
Yeah.
is worrying for folks like you, which is that one of the ways in which the OSA is going to be applied, and this is actually, I need to explain this carefully and clearly, is not to clamp down on all conversations that are inconvenient to the powers that be,
Yeah.
the executive or the government, because technically that's infeasible and impossible.
yeah,
There is a concept called virality,
right,
right? Just like COVID-19 and super spreaders, that language now we are very familiar with. For whatever reason, something that somebody says at some point of time over some medium that's posted somewhere may later on be picked up by another that is then the cause for that original content to go viral.
right.
Not the first time it was published, promoted, or posted.
Like Natasha's,
Natasha's.
Right?
like comment,
So-
yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
exactly right. So it
Yeah.
might be this live stream. It might be any live stream of
Sure.
yours. That 2 years down the line, maybe at the commemoration of the 5th year after the Aragalaya,
Yeah.
someone posts and says, "Hey, what a great discussion!" And at that point of time, it's subject to the OSA and the interpretation whether you are arousing feelings
Communal
of hatred
feelings.
or pantibedaya,
Right.
or whether this was the original producer. So get what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
the space that you think you have to have GGY, because it is online, is subject more to the OSA than ironically
Those-
if you were
On the street.
on the street.
On the street. Yeah.
On the street and
Yeah.
without being,
Yeah.
you could have those conversations,
Right.
but the moment that they're recorded
Yeah.
and posted, it's ironic, right?
Yeah.
You now have a greater sense
Whose
of
idea was
freedom,
this? Yeah.
to kind of do it on the street. So I mean, of course, there are other laws that kind of prevent that as well, particularly in the north and the east.
Right.
Right.
We have all these media people coming and talking to
No,
us.
but the media can decide what they
But
publish.
that's why he said, as soon as it's recorded,
Yeah.
then it's digitalized
So
and
that
under
is
this.
recorded.
So then that
No,
at
but
that
then
point
the,
it
but the
becomes
media only
3%.
publishes little snippets. Of course, they might, under the new law, they might be able to compel
Well,
the entire recording,
In
right?
the entire thing.
Yeah, but also now, I mean, again, another thing that I want to just place on record is that the potential for weaponizing the OSA, particularly in an electoral period and particularly in a context of generative AI,
Yeah.
is mind-boggling and absolutely mind-numbingly chilling.
Right.
Because I can create your voice, I can create your avatar, I can put my army of bots as comments on one of your particular videos,
Yeah.
and I can report you as having contravened the OSA.
Yeah, we.
Right? So,
Yeah.
no, but bots is a very specific thing for academic researchers like myself. I think the common conception of bots is very different to what we consider to be bots. But that's an academic difference. The point is that you can actually create avenues and pathways through artificially generated content and commentary targeting a particular media person or a particular video or a particular account can be posted in a way that that person can't control it, which is then reported as that person's contravention of the OSA.
Right.
Which means that you can clamp down on political activity, political campaigning, critical communications, any kind of media that holds power accountable as a consequence of the weaponization of the OSA and the creation of synthetic media.
Right. So what
To make this all that much more
right.
complicated.
So what is the end game of all of this? Where do they see all of this leading to?
Well, one is that this is, if you take it as a toolkit, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not going to be applied every day, but it can be applied any day.
Yeah.
You're not going to be probably fall under it, but you could be.
But
Right, so-
Sanjana, now
so-
we have an election coming up.
Right. No, it's
I mean,
essentially it's if you want to take, you can answer it in two ways. As I said, it's a toolkit.
Right.
You can answer it in terms of the current political context and the current incumbents, or you can answer it as a Democrat.
Right.
which is about the structures of power that we have.
Sure.
The executive presidency and the constitution as we have it and the world as we know it. Within the first parameters, which is the incumbent executive and the political structure that we have, it's very clear that this whole scaffolding is with a view to the retention of power.
It's power and control.
It's power and control,
Right.
and constriction and censorship and clamping down on dissent. Anything that remotely resembles an Aragalaya, again I stress, an Aragalaya in the sense of a collective of stories that hold power accountable
Yeah.
is systematically and structurally
Broken
clamped
by
down.
this, clamped down by this.
Right? So for the incumbents, this is a huge, because they can weaponize it against political opponents and oppositional parties and
Right.
civil society and activists and human rights advocates and so on and so forth.
So I feel things like this, when the UNP General Secretary proposed postponing elections,
Yeah.
could also be like a test balloon.
well, I mean, the
I
marketers
think-
would call,
I mean-
the marketers would call this A/B testing.
Well, because I feel that would be a breaking point. I mean, I think that's a line that they will cross if they do that. And that could catalyze into something like an Aragalaya. It could bring people back onto the streets, create sort of a lot of dissent and sort of...
Well, I mean, it could.
Yeah.
I have always said, and perhaps this
I
is...
think people have a line. I feel
Well,
everybody has
I
a
don't
line.
know what that line is.
Right.
I think that we saw one line as a consequence of a unprecedented confluence of events and circumstances. The cynical may suggest that the middle class in Colombo only came out because there was no petrol.
No petrol, no
Right,
power.
so there was an unprecedented confluence.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what that line is without that
Right.
confluence, because
You're
I
right.
certainly didn't see a line
Well, it
in
was
May 2009.
Right.
I certainly didn't see a line after Lasanta. I certainly didn't see a line after the human rights violations, the extrajudicial killings, the abductions, and so on and so forth.
I think before the Aragalaya, the only other moment that I can think of is when the constitutional coup happened, right?
In the 52 day in late 2018.
Right. I mean,
Right,
and
but that's a
people
very
were
different
really
line.
rattled by that, and people got out onto the streets, and they,
Okay,
because they saw.
so much we can talk about, because
Right.
actually that was because that's also part of my PhD. It's a chapter in my PhD.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so, it's so different to also the Aragalaya. And it's so different too, and this is where the tragedy is, the incumbent as we have him in his avatar today.
That's right.
Right?
What happened to the Liberal
So
Democrat?
organically,
Yeah.
and I'll just put it simply and very, very, very quickly, because academics like myself can measure this, right? So it's a measurable thing. Organically, the popularity of the then Prime Minister was unprecedented.
Right.
And it also grew
Yeah.
through unlike-minded people. So there were multiples of an unprecedented moment where come that January, it was the perfect time if we wanted to do something to get rid of the executive presidency. Because by Jove, we had a massive mandate to do it.
A mandate to do that.
You could study it, you could see it, and it wasn't a partisan opinion.
Right.
It was evident.
Yeah.
Right?
So
So that's the incumbent we have today, doing everything possible to kind of do the opposite.
Right. So imagine they float something like this.
Yeah.
And they actually take steps to maybe make this happen. I mean, with the current composition in Parliament, anything is possible, right? They could bring something and say, okay, we will extend the life of this Parliament for another 2 years. They pass something in Parliament and then they put it on us without a referendum,
Yeah.
nothing. Could they before doing that, they'll have to bring in something like the OSA to break up any form of dissent.
Oh, yeah.
And could that succeed then? Could they then do this? Because I don't think this is a joke. I think this was orchestrated.
Can I ask you something?
May I just respond to that very quickly? The question you asked me, the answer is in April, the Easter Sunday attacks. We are talking about a country, we are talking about individuals who today are scot-free,
Yeah.
who killed over 5 times as many people who died in the March 2019 attacks in Christchurch, which I also studied, as you
Yeah.
introduced me as.
That's right.
So I have studied both events for my PhD thesis.
Actually, the death toll went up by one more. A lady passed away
Right?
yesterday
So
as well. Yeah.
so you are asking me that question in a country that is willing to kill.
Yeah.
So, I think you have the answer to that. This
Yeah.
pales into insignificance around the architecting of societal instability to retain power if we take a look at what people did in April to grasp power, which we can openly say, even if we are too scared to name.
Yeah.
We know
Yeah.
who did that.
Sure.
And we know why they did it.
There's plenty
So
in public
this
domain
on
already. I mean, I
screen
think, yeah.
It pales into insignificance. Of course, yes, they might be trying to do this. They might try other tricks as well. And for henceforth, as long as the OSA is in our statute books, anything that they try to do to retain power in a manner that is unconstitutional will be aided by the OSA.
Right.
Because you're not going to be able to have those conversations anymore, or the critical commentary, or the publications, or the productions, anything like this that holds them accountable. You will not have an Aragale. You will not have the kind of conversations you had during the constitutional crisis or coup late 2018 for 52 days. You will not have any kind of conversation at any point of time, no matter who you voted for, that you have been proud to be associated with, that has said, eka hinda tamai araka une.
Right.
It is a complete stop to all of that kind of bearing witness.
Right. Dushi, you had some questions, right? I think
Sorry, both
Adam
had,
Aubrey had a, yeah.
On this subject,
Hold the mic, Auntie.
on this subject, I listened to a YouTube last night. What they said was, this was brought in by a particular news channel to create news. Word use was something else, there was nothing to say. So they brought this as a breaking news. Then everybody got excited and
Brought in what?
the story. No, this story.
Oh, this story, right.
This story was
Right.
brought in the morning.
Well, it was a press conference held by the by the
That news was brought in by this particular channel to create news. And this is what I've heard, I don't know.
Well, I don't think the fact that
Then everybody.
Auntie, the thing is, this is the UNP General Secretary.
Yeah,
Then next day, there's an editorial in the Daily Mirror where the president says, no, that actually, you know what, he doesn't support this. So I feel it's a little bit of political theater. It's right. Yeah,
We can
political.
hypothesize as to what.
No, well, you might be right. I mean, it's political theater, right?
Yeah, did this guy today not withdraw to say it is his personal view and not that of the party?
No, what he said today was that what he said was that if there's a referendum, if he can have a referendum to extend the life of the parliament, he can win a election. He sort of like kind of smoothed it over by saying something like that.
So it's
or maybe somebody else said
one
that.
nonsensical comment after another nonsensical comment followed by another nonsensical.
Pretty much. I think, no, because I think there's a certain amount of drama that's created that sort of obfuscates the real sort of issues in the country, the real things that are going on.
100%, yeah.
Right? I mean, the actual laws that are being brought in, the Adani deal or the VFS. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Well, may I propose another theory?
Right.
Which of course goes into the darker, the darker recesses of my mind. But this is A/B testing in another way, potentially.
Right.
I don't want to give too many ideas, but you could determine as a consequence of the announcement who were the most critical voices and how those critical voices were spread and how that commentary spread.
Right.
So that's what you call a pathology.
Right.
A pathology, just like in medical sciences, is very, very useful because you then determine how something spreads, where it spreads from, where it's seeded, how it spreads,
Create
how fast
a
it spreads.
completely new narrative.
So you
see how it spreads.
How the opposition spreads, opposition to it. So this was something that was such an affront that you had the bar, you had civil society, you had politicians, all, but what you call a narrative signature is different. Somebody may have said it on Twitter. Somebody may have said it in Sinhala on YouTube. Somebody may have said it in a 5-minute video or on Facebook. You see, so it depends on language. It depends on technology. It depends on platform. Once you have a pathology of the opposition to that announcement, you now have a construct of oppositional voices.
Right.
And that's very, very useful.
Yeah, because this is something that is so clearly unconstitutional. I mean,
but my point, it is. But the point of the thing wasn't the announcement.
Yeah.
The point of the announcement
was the reaction.
Was the reaction.
Chris says something. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that the bar made a comment. if I remember correct, Sanjay, it wasn't the bar.
It was Sali Perez, yes, yes.
The bar has not said
No,
anything.
that's right. Yes.
The bar hasn't said anything yet. The chambers of commerce haven't said anything yet.
Yeah.
Yet professional bodies haven't
The
said
bar
anything.
has their own problems right now.
Sali, yes, yes.
Bar
You're
is
right.
sorting out the JICA funds.
They have their own
Still,
problems.
yes,
They have their own
that's-
problems.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's also
Dushi, you have a question, no?
That's also true.
Yeah.
Good call.
Thanks. Can I be heard? Yes, okay. Sanjana, my question is about digital security.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is there any possibility of digital security in the country, particularly for the protection of investigative journalists? You spoke about this, and also human rights defenders.
Yeah, no, forget about it.
So whistleblowers, can this law compel sources, for example?
It's every question that you ask, the answer is
Yes.
very clearly yes.
Yes, okay.
Right?
So there's nowhere to hide,
It depends.
I guess.
I'm being facetious here for
Yeah.
the interest of time. Digital security means very different things, right?
Right.
Digital security is not one monolithic thing, and it's very complicated and it means different things to different people. But essentially speaking, what the OSA does is that it undermines completely privileged communications.
Okay.
So whistleblowers handing over, in good faith material to an investigative journalist, all communications that even may be encrypted that that investigative journalist may have had or have, any content on their devices, any content on the cloud, which is online,
Right.
all conversations that are not what you call ephemeral, which is that you can set up messages to disappear. All content and commentary is subject to the OSA.
You can.
So you can pretty much say goodbye to privileged communications. Consequently, your digital security is also egregiously undermined because you can't now protect the individuals that you are communicating with as a consequence of what may be the potential for the OSA to be used to even retroactively get into those communications. Right? So it kind of like, it's devastating for investigative journalism. It's devastating for what I set up in 2006, Ground Views and
Right.
Vikalpa and
Of
Matra
course.
and citizen journalism. It's devastating for acts of journalism. Acts of journalism is what defined GGG.
Yeah.
Acts of journalism, citizens taking a camera, citizens taking it upon themselves to bear witness to what was going on in front of the parliamentary secretariat, in front of temple
Yeah,
trees.
yeah.
That extraordinary, I still get goosebumps because I studied it, I talked about it. I was a student of it and contributing to it from New Zealand, and the vividness and the multiplicity and the multiple perspectives of that acts of journalism by those people who were leading the charge was unprecedented.
Right.
Now, ironically, all of that material can be used against you. So if in the future, if tomorrow, and I really don't want to give ideas, so I really have to be careful about what I say. But if there was an interest in going back and looking at all that footage and then holding those people accountable for what is now the executive's narrative of an Aragalaya that was antithetical to democracy, because that's the narrative, right?
Yeah, yeah. They
In the
demonize
pursuit
the
of that narrative,
Yeah.
just imagine if they go back and then start investigating what you may have even if you didn't put up, but is digitally stored on your personal cloud.
Yeah.
Right? Again, I have to be really careful to not give ideas.
Yeah,
I have to be really mindful of this in public forums.
I mean,
like this.
isn't it amazing?
But it is really, really bad
Yeah.
for privileged communications, investigative journalists,
narrative
and digital
is the
security.
cause of the economic crisis. Is being
Yeah.
done
I mean,
so much.
patently false and silly.
I mean,
right? But they will push
but
it.
this is the narrative, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Narratives are really integral to populism.
But there
And so
is
you have to understand it that way.
an interesting way laws are structured. The anti-corruption law is not retroactive.
Yeah, I was
But the
thinking-
online safety act is retroactive.
It can be interpreted retroactive.
So whatever they do is always contingent on protecting themselves.
Yeah.
Right? At the expense of the
But
freedoms
also
of
the
the
first
people.
cases under, Harin talks about, it's absurd, no? Mr. Fernando, he took recourse to the OSA to investigate things that were said against him
On
Yeah.
the visa.
on the visa scandal.
Right. Exactly.
What is this nonsense?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
What is this nonsense?
Yeah.
They actually used it about 4 times.
Yeah. Well, it's
In
been
the
used by
closed door
various
workshop,
people as well. Yeah.
I can't name it because it was Chatham House rule, but a very senior, very well-known member of parliament from the ruling coalition or government came and suggested to all of us in a room which was full of diplomats as well, and myself, that at the time the OSB, the bill, was somehow going to stop the kind of incident that we have in Myanmar with workers going in and then getting scammed and, that issue. And you're like,
Were you picking
I
this
was
up?
livid.
Ledger.
Ledger.
And I said,
Ledger.
you sound like a broken ChatGPT,
Yeah.
right? Because this is what we are good at, what some of us is our subject domain expertise. And to come back to this country as a conscious decision that some of us have done, which is the reverse of what,
Your reverse mind.
hundreds and tens of thousands of others are doing. And to hear this nonsense being promoted as the basis for this to be in our statute books
Right.
is just anger. It's also very, very sad.
Yeah. So Sanjana, thank you for scaring us today.
I'm terrified.
But you, we've had multiple discussions on the OSA. Actually, we've spoken to various, we've spoken to lawyers, we've spoken to other activists and so on. But this is the first time that you've brought the danger that this poses to civil society, to freedom of speech, to even our democracy in such sort of stark relief, right? Like I think this is a very useful discussion for us to understand what this actually means to sort of broad, dissent and protest and things that we do, how it will affect us. So we thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
I hope we still have a GGY by Sunday. Because we all have something to lose, right? We all have something to lose. We are doing this despite. You want to say something? Go ahead, Chris.
Just one last question, sorry.
Yeah.
Now, this act is probably passed over 2 months ago, correct? Okay.
But it's now held, right? It's not in effect.
What do you mean?
It's in effect? No.
But
It's
in the
in
courts, isn't it subject
No.
to the court's decision and
No,
the
that
changes?
is going on. The Supreme Court will adjudicate on the constitutionality of the passage, but that's not prevented. The magisterial
Okay.
route is available,
All right.
and the
Okay.
commission hasn't been appointed.
Right.
But there have been several cases that have been brought up,
Already.
including by the Army
Correct.
Commander
Okay.
against YouTube,
Got it.
and so other cases have also been made under the
Right.
OSA. So it's active.
Right.
Yeah, so this is a very basic line of thinking of mine. I just want to know what I expected was after it was passed, they would start, picking on certain people, especially who speak out a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people, we speak out, but there are people who speak out far more than us. Why hasn't that happened? Why do you think so? Why do you feel it hasn't happened so far? I just want to know what your feeling on it is.
Aswaha Katava, do you want it to happen?
Yeah.
What kind of question is
Chris, he said this many times tonight. I don't want to give them ideas, right? So by preempting these with certain questions,
do we need to talk about that? Do we want that to happen?
now that the cat's out of the bag, you might as well answer that question.
One is that it's not going to be immediate. I said there are considerations of virality.
Right.
They're not going to do it immediately because this is one of the first laws that were passed that literally, I think the very next day, the minister in charge said that amendments were going to be made to satisfy the industry's concerns. Right. So it's flawed on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Right. So the fact that the Army Commander has now compelled YouTube to kind of give evidence with regards to a case is meaningless because Google is not going to move in that regard, right? So I suppose the amendments are going to indemnify the industry as well. So the point is that I wasn't expecting, as Sir you did perhaps, an immediate application of this because that too is also detrimental to the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Because the narrative is about a democratic, blossoming, blooming, prosperous Sri Lanka, no, that's everything's kosher, and so that clampdown in the manner, sir, that you put it, will not occur unless there is a crisis on the lines of what I think that was tried.
Right.
But the point is that they are looking, they are surveilling, they are studying, and they will use it in a manner that is detrimental to the freedom of expression at any given point of time into the future.
Right. Also, an immediate application could have the opposite effect of inflaming people too.
And also, that's right. So they could
Right.
have, you know, so it's not in their self-interest to do that.
Yeah.
Right? It's simply not. But that's why Katafai was joking. He's like, you know, you don't want to give them a reason to do that also. And as long, I'm a student of English literature, so we call it a Damoclean sword.
Yeah.
Right?
It's hanging there.
Unlike anything else in our statute books,
Yeah.
and it impacts everybody, including those you think will be impacted, but also those you don't think will be impacted as well.
Yeah.
So as long as it's there, those chilling effects are real,
Yeah.
right? Because you're in a state of anxiety. And also, I'll tell you what, I mean, I know that we are way over time. You know, Freud was very clear about fear, fright, and anxiety. Fear and fright are things that you know you should be scared about. Anxiety is things that you don't know quite clearly, may hurt and harm you. We are now in a state of heightened anxiety because you don't know what you have said and what you may say that may be interpreted in a way that contravenes the way it's said.
That's by design.
And that is by design.
That's by
You
design.
could literally say, for example, and I could go to courts for this, Mahindage Satake Hari Kathai. That's my opinion. But now that can be weaponized.
We have said worse than that.
No, but what I'm saying is, that,
Yeah.
but you know, you have to tackle the
Yeah.
absurdity of this,
Yeah.
right? It could be anything that arouses somebody's feelings, right? So, you know, and that's by design, because what you're doing is that chilling effect then is about anything that you can say, so people don't say anything.
I mean, Chris, if you're feeling left out, it'll come. It'll happen. Don't worry.
And guys, like, you know, there are all sorts of ways that I don't want to talk about in the public domain how this can be weaponized, but this
Right.
is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
It's not good.
Okay. So I think shall we wrap it up
No,
with
no.
that? I think we've learned a lot, right? And maybe more, yeah. I mean, no. So I think wider society doesn't have a clue what's coming. You know, I mean, what?
They have no understanding of the law.
Right.
Well, that's what surprises me, to be honest. I haven't had an adequate explanation as to why that has been the case. I mean, this is like, it goes for your jugular.
Yeah.
It goes to the jugular of GGY. It
But
goes to the jugular of the traditions and the
I-
foundations you want to uphold, which
Right.
started in 2022. And it's not just you.
Well, I think it tells you
nobody
something
I have
about-
talked to just...
Right. I think it tells you something about the media landscape in this country as well. I mean, the fact that we don't hear,
One of which is that.
you know, I mean, this is an existential crisis for our democracy. And I think clear-eyed people who are engaged, will see it that way. And the others who are low information, sort of, you know, in terms of political engagement, will just let it slide by thinking it won't affect us, you know. But Sanjay, thank you so much for bringing this to us and talking about this this with us. You know, we'll upload it to YouTube as well, and hope YouTube will keep it there, even after they hear what you've had to say. So usually we end the stream with a quote that Leisha picks every week.
All right.
That has something to do with the topic that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
Leisha,
So my
over
one
to
is
you.
a quote from Life, Benjamin Franklin. Freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins.
Yeah. So I think
We are kind of there.
that sort of captures.
You have frightened me to death, I might add.
Yeah.
I
No,
think
no,
terrified all of us.
Right. No, we all have something to lose, right? I mean, we stepped out thinking that we can actually gain something in terms of, you know, governance and system change, political change in the political culture. But the pushback is this. This is the pushback because the Aragalaya really shook the incumbent political structure to its foundations, and they don't want anything like this happening
Ever again.
ever again.
Ever again.
So I think that is where we are, and that is why they like you said, the scaffolding, all the laws that are coming in, they are not unrelated. They're all kind of creating this kind
It's
of
very strategic, it's very intentional.
right. What was
And there are
that?
so many
What
others.
was that
We
you
have
said?
imitation,
They're building a. What are they building? They're building a
What, a repressive...
panopticon.
A panopticon,
They're
yeah.
building a panopticon. Right. So you know we will be living in that sort of a.
Well,
sort of,
we are.
We are already.
Let's be very clear about it.
Right. Well, let's hope civic spaces like this will exist in a couple of years' time.
Which is why it's important that you can keep doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. So, guys, we stick to our guns, right? We're not going anywhere. So, Sanjana, thank you so much
Thank you for having me. Thank you for
for being with us
having me.
today. I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks, guys. I'm not going to mention everybody by name because we've really gone over time. Normally, we end with Chris sort of reading out sort of all the scams and reminding people about everything that we're fighting for.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll leave it for next week. Thank you, Sanjana. Thank you to the crew. Thank you, Anu and Siki, for putting this together as always. We'll see you guys on Sunday at our street corner. And that's a wrap from day 283 at GGY. Good night.